governance agendas. He signed an executive order to review foreign proxy advisors. He says these advisors hold big sway over American corporations and even Americans' retirement accounts. Trump has determined the advisors are acting on radical ideas and are politically motivated and are not solely concerned with maximizing investor returns, which he said should be the top priority. One of the firms responded to the order, telling media they work for institutional investors independently. Let's look at the impacts of this with Diana Furchtgott-Roth, Director of the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for your time, Diana. This is what we're talking about, Institutional Shareholder Services Incorporated and Glass Lewis & Company, LLC. What do they do? And are they affecting Americans' financial bottom line positively or negatively?
What they do is they collect proxy votes and they advise shareholders on how to vote. So those of our listeners who have shares might find that they get something in the mail from, which is a question on how they want to vote on a particular matter affecting the company. And what Glass Lewis and ISS do is make recommendations. The problem is that sometimes their recommendations are not aligned with the best interests of the company. In particular, they're very much focused on environmental, social governance. They have climate transition plans that they often recommend against the advice of the board. And that means that these firms get driven in a different direction from what is most profitable for them. And that's against the interests of the shareholders, because shareholders want profitable firms. They don't want firms that lose money.
Understood. Now, what good can come from these reviews that the Securities and Exchange Commission is now ordered to carry out, including rules, regulations, guidance, bulletins, memos?
Well, it's the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Labor Department. So all three can decide that other proxy advisory firms should be allowed in. I have always been puzzled why this market was just allocated to ISS and Glass Lewis. There should be a number of other companies that are approved to collect these proxy votes. And the Federal Trade Commission in particular will be looking at evidence of antitrust violations, that these two groups basically colluded to take this business and have the same standards, and also that these standards are not in the interests of the American people, they're not in the interests of the firms, and they are foreign-owned. They're owned by Canada and Germany. So these are countries that are propelling an environmentalist agenda, and this agenda is being reflected on the choices American shareholders have.
Thank you for explaining that, Diana. And at the same time, we've seen allegations that these ESG policies are costing Americans big bucks by not going with the cheapest energy policies, or even leading to some called indoctrination of employees being forced to take courses, training courses they call them, that don't align with the common knowledge of just how you should normally interact with people. But broadly speaking, how does this new push from the Trump administration fit in with broader efforts to dismantle ESG, and how successful could it be?
Well, it could potentially be very successful if other firms are allowed in to collect these proxy votes, and if other firms reflect the preferences of the board. The ultimate challenge for any organization is choosing the best policies and the best qualified people. You don't want to choose on the basis of affirmative action. You want the most qualified workforce that you have. And you don't want to choose on the basis of political correctness. You want to have the least expensive, most reliable fuel. That is going to make your company get further ahead than if they endorse renewables that might cost the firm more, both in the short and the long run. So this could have very positive effects on firm governance and the American economy and shareholders' wallets. Those of our listeners who own shares know that they want them to grow as fast as possible. That means the most qualified people, the least expensive sources of energy, and the best policies.
So interesting how this is turning into something political. I mean, it depends on who you ask. If you ask certain people who are not the federal government, they might say that coal isn't that much cheaper than, say, solar or wind power, where if you ask the government, and they're pretty reliable, they say no, coal is much cheaper. So it's all a big mix. And then the issue of, well, if you get these renewables, where are the solar panels coming from? China. So you're enriching a genocidal regime. It's just something y'all have to weigh when you go about this. Now, you mentioned the FTC and their antitrust investigations, these proxy advisors, and you mentioned that this may be happening. Now, how would that impact Americans if it is?
What it would do is it would give American shareholders a broader choice. It would mean that the boards of these companies can rely on shareholders having the most accurate information when it comes to votes, instead of being prejudiced by foreign-owned proxy companies. And I think that that's very important. And in terms of renewables, we know that they're weakening the electricity grid and driving up prices, because in terms of high electricity prices, 9 out of the top 10 states in electricity prices require renewables. 9 out of the bottom 10 states in electricity prices do not require renewables, and it's a difference of 3 to 1, about 11 cents an hour in Utah, about 32 cents an hour in California. And we know what people like, low electricity prices, because that's better on their wallets.
It's so important to pay attention to what you're saying, and we know that Americans do not like foreigners interfering with their elections, their 401ks, their corporations. That's why this is big news here. Now, have we seen any of these racial equity audits or a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from large American corporations or investment firms that may be tied to these proxy advisors?
I think it's very clear that when proxy advisors have ESG themes and climate transition themes that they're trying to push, then that prejudices them against using America's oil and natural gas because they're biased against those sources of energy. But Americans want low electricity prices, not high electricity prices. And many communities are turning down what they see as ugly wind turbines and ugly solar panels. 70% of wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries are made in China, and China subsidizes these to undercut American and European producers. So we don't want proxy advisory firms that are lobbying essentially on behalf of China.
Very, very important to note, and interesting that you bring that up. And if they're avoiding American energy, and if it's oil, it might be Iranian oil that's being produced in order to fill the gap, which may not be environmentally created, and it may just be fueling a state sponsor of terrorism. So that's pretty clear that that's not in the American interest. Now, when you look at the Trump administration, how is it going about uprooting and exposing all these things? Is it using the correct legal avenues, and is it doing enough?
President Trump is asking 3 agencies, the Securities and Exchange Commission that deals with stocks, the Labor Department that deals with pension funds, and the Federal Trade Commission that deals with collusion, to look at this. And each of these agencies is going to take a look and see what they come up with and see what their conclusion is. I have always found it puzzling that it is just these 2 entities, Glass Lewis and ISS, that are so prevalent, that have the advantage in collecting these proxy votes when they are so biased in terms of environmentalism and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because what we need is the lowest cost energy, and we need the most qualified people, no matter what their race or color.
It is fascinating to think about the complexities of the big picture here. Thank you for that insight. I mean, how an American's take-home pay and their actual bottom line could be affected by someone who doesn't vote in this country, who's not even within the American jurisdiction at all. Diana Furchtgott-Roth, we appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Stay with us. 2 lawsuits targeting Wisconsin's congressional map advanced today. This as newly formed 3-judge panels meet for the first time. We'll have that and more after the break.